8 Academy Award nominations in 1971 and 5 wins, including Best Picture and Best Actor for Gene Hackman in a career-making performance. Named one of the 100 best films by the American Film Institute and a top 10 crime movie by countless others. Based on the best-selling book by Robin Moore, brought to the screen by the producer of Bullet, Phil D'Antoni, and a film that defined the career of Best Director winner William Friedkin.
All right, let's hit him! Hit him!
But that's only a small part of the amazing 40-year French Connection legacy. From the history-making bust that changed police work to the acclaimed book that recounted its every gripping detail to the most celebrated chase scene in the history of movie making in a groundbreaking film that changed Hollywood forever. This documentary follows the incredible...
You did not mess with Sonny. Eddie had the bluster, but Sonny had the iron fist.
Sonny Grasso was the kind of guy that, if I was a cop, I'd want him for a partner.
Yeah, they say the good cop, bad cop.
Eddie and I made thousands of arrests, and that's from a team that nobody wanted to be together.
Do you believe all this crap? I go with my partner.
We were rated number 1 and 2, and that went on for 11 consecutive years.
Well, first, I think it was the incredible work ethic. I think you guys sometimes did 400 collars in a year. I mean, I don't think that's been equal since.
We developed month after month. I found out that he was as courageous as I was. He'd go to the roof, I'd go through the door, he'd slide down a banister. He did all the crazy things that I did. And they've written a lot of articles about us. All I can say is they're all true.
He had met Walter Winchell through another partner of ours, Richie Pardo, and Eddie Egan and Winchell became very good friends. And so anything we did, Eddie would have reporters there before we even got people to the precinct. I remember a collar that we grabbed the guy with a half a kilo, and when I got to the precinct, the reporters were there already. And the reporters said to me, "How did you feel when he lowered you down into the sewer to get that key to the locker box?" And I kind of looked at Eddie, looked at the reporter, and I said, "Let me think about that." I took Eddie outside. I said, "What the hell are you telling these people?" He said, "Listen, they'd like to hear those things. The thing is, we have to make the arrest, lock up the bad guys. Let them read something in the paper the next day." In 1961, the bad guy everybody wanted was Jean Jahan, the French Godfather. Jahan and his cronies were bringing in 60 kilos of heroin into New York City every 6 weeks for 25 years. When my partner Eddie Egan and I finally put these humps away, it changed my life in ways I could never imagine. The French Connection meant there were street connections, there were Spanish connections, there were black connections, there were Italian connections. The first time, the drugs, the customers, the connections, the money, all came together on the streets of New York.
The biggest heroin bust in history.
Well, I think it's the most spectacular case that's come down the pike in my time. It's the one that stands out most vividly in my mind. And I've been in law enforcement since the 50s.
It was almost stranger than fiction.
One day I was in a police car riding with Eddie Egan, and we got a phone call from the chief of detective's office. And they instructed me and Eddie to respond to Toots Shor's restaurant to meet a Mr. Robin Moore. It seemed that Robin Moore was interested in doing a book on this case that Eddie and I made. And before I had a chance to answer the chief of detective's office, he said to me, "And listen, I'm holding you responsible." But when I said to Eddie, "What do you think about this?" he couldn't wait to get down to Toots. He was off, and everybody was sitting there listening to every single thing he said. So Eddie was always thinking book and movie, and he's responsible for a lot of what happened. When we started to write this book, Eddie and Robin Moore were bar hopping. They were enjoying themselves, they were having lots of fun, lots of laughs, but there wasn't a lot of writing being done.
I said, let's go down to Jamaica where we can be relaxed and work, and nobody will be around, nobody can bother us, and we can really work. So Eddie said, well, I don't want to go down there because they got anacondas there. Eddie was always afraid to go out because he was afraid the anaconda snakes would get him. And I didn't tell him the word. I really didn't tell him the word then. I wanted to keep him around me, so he didn't go out.
The French Connection book finally came out in February of 1969.
A master bit of storytelling.
A riveting account of the biggest heroin bust in history.
The authentic flavor of the French Connection is the sort of thing that I try to introduce to my own works.
The absolute fortune of having Robin Moore listen to Sonny and Eddie.
When I heard Phil D'Antoni, the producer of Bullet, was interested in the French Connection book and wanted to meet Eddie and I tell you, I was completely bowled over.
It was a good story, but I just couldn't see making a movie out of it at that moment.
But that's before he met Eddie Egan.
Suddenly, it came together.
And all of a sudden, out of the woodwork, comes a guy named G. David Chine. And he told Robin Moore that he could get the money to do this movie.
He said, well, can you give me some kind of an okay? And I said, look, I can't give you anything, but I'll just sign my name on this cocktail napkin to show you that we've discussed it. So I wrote my name on a cocktail napkin and handed it to him. Just my autograph on it. I said, David, let's do this movie. And Robin Moore on the cocktail napkin. And that was the beginning of the end.
And he produced a napkin that was all kind of shriveled up. It was a paper napkin. And he said, here, look at this.
And since our option had technically expired in the interim period, his claim was pretty good.
So he said, this is it, and this is my claim, and I'll take you to every court in the land to prove my rights.
And I said, Robin, what the hell is this story about Phil and Billy are not doing this movie anymore? He said, Sonny, if you want them to do the book, they got it. They got the book. You give it back to them. So I called up Phil D'Antoni and I told him, I says, Robin says you still got the book. And Phil told me, you know what? This is the most important phone call you'll ever make in your life. And it really was.
Fox was getting very nervous because they wanted this picture made, and we had about 4 or 5 more weeks in pre-production.
I said to the guys that are connected with French Connection, guys, don't let this go into a lawsuit. Don't protest. I've been in the business a long time, which I was even then. It's going to take years and the picture will never get made. And what's more, Zanuck and I may not be here to superintend it, which was prophetic. Zanuck and I were fired not long before the picture was completed. We didn't even get to see the movie except through a bootleg print. So I guess my advice was good.
G. David Chine made an awful lot of money on that shriveled up napkin that Robin signed, but he had to agree on one thing.
He would never show up, ever, on the set. He was persona non grata, and he kept his word.
The next thing I know, after I meet Phil D'Antoni, I hear that he's bringing in a director named Billy Friedkin.
And I knew a lot about Billy. I knew about his documentary background. I knew about the grittiness that he had shown when he did a movie, a documentary about a man who was on death row. Billy, again, it was an instinct. He felt right.
He told me that he wanted this film about the French Connection to have a documentary look and feel. And I said, well, it sounds extraordinary. What I'd like to do is meet the 2 police officers who broke the case, and let's see if we can find out something through them about the personality of the case. Not just the storyline, but the people who made this thing happen, both from the police standpoint and from the other guys, the bad guys' standpoint.
And then when Billy come walking into the room, he looked about 20 years old. And I kept looking at this guy and I said, this is the guy that's going to do this movie? Boy, was I wrong about this guy.
So now I meet these 2 guys who were almost humorous in their approach to street crime. Sonny's approach to a case was pessimistic, while Eddie's was optimistic. So Eddie was Popeye and Sonny was Cloudy. And this is what intrigued me the first time I met them. These 2 guys were so extremely different that I thought, you know, this is interesting.
The next person on the list to meet was a writer by the name of Ernest Tiedemann.
I was shocked when he walked into my office because I was expecting a black person, an African American. I mean, because Shaft obviously was about Afro-Americans. Instead, in came in this white, very waspy fellow from Ohio who was now working for the New York Times.
We went to him and gave him the story, and he wrote a screenplay for us for very little money.
We would meet every morning from 9 to 12 in Billy's apartment, and we would discuss step by step, scene by scene, page by page.
It was, you know, I think it was $5,000. It was something, a minuscule amount.
And then Ernest would go off at 12 noon, write the pages, and the next morning we would meet again, read the pages, correct them, and go on to the next thing. And that was how that script got written.
Phil and I spent over a year trying to get a studio to make this picture. Every studio turned this picture down, most of them twice.
It got turned down by everybody for various reasons.
David Brown and his partner Richard Zanuck ran the 20th Century Fox movie studios. They had recently produced Patton, MASH, and Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid.
As a producer, I always ask another producer or director or actor, have you got something for me? And Phil said, I've got something, but everybody has turned it down.
The fact that it was based on a real incident and the characters were very much alive and different. And I just, it just struck me as a great piece of material.
You can't describe what you like in a script in intellectual terms. It's emotional, it's visceral, it's in your gut.
Sometimes the gut is right, sometimes it's entirely wrong. In this case, it happened to be superbly right.
What I saw in French Connection was what I see in a girl that I fall in love with. The script excited me.
Go ahead. He said, I don't know why I'm doing it. I just have a hunch that it might work. And that's how it got greenlit.
We went to meet Phil D'Antoni and Billy Friedkin in a hotel in Midtown. Fox wanted a contract signed by Eddie and I. At that time, there was no moonlighting in the police department. And Eddie said to me, you got to sign this. I said, I'm not going to sign it. I'm a first-grade detective, and I don't want to lose that, and I'm not going to risk it. So he said to me, well, look, wait outside. And Eddie came out and he says, it's okay. It's a handshake. 5 years later, I found out that Eddie went back in, got the contracts, said to them, he was taking them out to me, went into the bathroom, signed his name to one contract and my name to another contract. So you see, Eddie was going to make this movie. Nobody was going to stand in his way.
The casting of this film was all in the hands of the movie god, because I must admit that we didn't know precisely what we were doing, D'Antoni and I, and we were shucking and jiving to put a cast together. Originally, we offered the lead role to Peter Boyle, who had just come off a film called Joe, and Peter Boyle was terrific in it. He turned it down. He wanted to play romantic leads.
The next thing I heard, they were considering Jackie Gleason to play Eddie Egan.
Gleason was a big, heavy-set Irishman with a very dark demeanor, even though he was a comedian. I thought he would be perfect to play Egan, but the studio wouldn't go with him because he had just made a film for them called Gigot, which was kind of a silent comedy made, and it didn't work, and so they said, no, we don't want to go with Jackie Gleason.
Jimmy Breslin, I thought, was an excellent idea. I mean, just, he looked the part.
And I think Eddie and I almost fainted then. I think we both felt, not this guy who goes around writing things about cops that are not positive at all.
But I knew him, and I thought he was an interesting guy. I auditioned him, and for about a week, and he couldn't cut it. It was clear he could not act. And then on the last day, he said to me, isn't there a car chase in this movie? And I said, yeah, Jimmy, there is. He said, well, you know, I don't drive a car. He said, I promised my mother on her deathbed that I'd never drive. I said, oh, well, you're fired.
He called up the people at Fox and said, if you're interested in us doing this with Jimmy Breslin, why don't you hire Egan to play his own part? He's an actor. He's been doing this. He's got way more experience than Breslin ever had. So why don't you consider him? And for a short time, they talked to us about playing our own parts in the movie. When we walked out of that meeting, I looked at him and I said, holy shit. And Eddie said, Why not? He always was ready for any challenge. Well, thank God they got their senses together and went with Hackman and Scheider.
Our first meeting with Danica Brown about casting was terrific because we were anticipating them wanting some big star.
So they came in and they said, I think we can get so-and-so and so-and-so. And I said, wait a minute. I don't see this. I'm not looking for big stars. I'm looking for the reality. And they said, oh.
And they were bowled over when we didn't want Robert Redford, Paul Newman, Clark Gable. We were willing to go with a couple of actors named Roy Scheider and Gene Hackman.
I think what really made me convinced that Roy was the right choice, my mother saw him and saw pictures of him long before the movie came out. My mother said, God, he is you. He looks just like you. I think a lot of that was in her own head. I think she was so happy there was a movie being done about her son that I think if they would have took anybody on earth, Wally Cox to play me, she would have been happy.
And Roy Scheider came in the room, as I say, and he told me he was playing a cigar-smoking nun in a Jean Genet play off-Broadway, and I talked to him for a minute, and I said, you're hired. He said, you mean you don't want me to read anything? I said, no, what do you have to read? What for? You are the guy. You are Sonny Grasso. You got the job.
Hackman was the problem because when we brought Hackman into New York to talk to Billy and I, he came in all duded up. He had lost a lot of weight. He had a mustache. He looked like Errol Flynn. And we were looking for Eddie Egan. We were looking for a big, rough, tough guy. He certainly didn't fit the part.
When I met Eddie, I could tell from the first meeting he didn't want me in the movie. He didn't want me to play him in the picture. He was just, he was polite and all that, but I got a real strong feeling from him about that.
It's the movie god. It wasn't anything that I did. Gene Hackman, as I say, was not our first choice. He wasn't our 10th choice.
The next person in line that I met was Owen Reutzmann. He was a documentarian, and Billy saw his reel.
Billy said, look, that was all, beautiful stuff, but has nothing to do with what I want to do on the French Connection.
But he had his shit together. He knew, when we first met and I said documentary style, he knew what that meant.
He said, I haven't seen anything of yours that looks like that. Do you think you could do something like that? And I said, well, why not? I said, I'm a cinematographer. I said, you tell me the mood you want, and I should be able to get it for you. That's what I do. And I guess he liked the ballsy attitude I had, and decided to go with me.
And he was great. His contributions were way beyond what a cameraman would normally do.
It's quite remarkable in that it looks unlit, and it looks like it was just captured.
I knew what he wanted to get, and I wanted to get it too. So we had a good partnership going. And for me, it was all exciting stuff. And what he didn't know, of course, was I had never really done anything like this. He might have surmised it, but I had to fake it all the time, and like I had been doing this all my life.
So when I was introduced to Owen, he seemed like a really nice guy. I liked him. I think he liked me. And so I tried. Eddie and I both tried to help him out.
And the reason why that happened was he saw my sister come on the set one day, and my sister was a real knockout. So he figured he'd butt her up to me so that he could get close to my sister. And, so you keep your hands off my sister, Sonny, all right?
And to this day, I never knew that he had caught on. Next in the successive line of people I met was Jerry Greenberg.
Certainly the material was always the indicator to me as to how the director would have wanted that film to go together.
I want the film to dictate its form to me. And so I'm very open to a lot of ideas by the editor that have nothing to do with what's scripted.
It became, in the making, for me anyway, something unique and different.
Well, we used to call him Big Bird, like from Sesame Street. Jerry's a great guy. A guy I worked with for a number of years afterwards. Jerry and he just complemented each other. He was able to listen to Billy, and Billy's a brilliant editor. Make no mistake about it. But Jerry was able to make his own little moves, and suggestions to Billy and at the right time.
I can say easily now, after 30 years have passed, and you know, many other films done, that it was one of the only films in which I...
And he said, what are you talking about? I says, well, I want to introduce you to these people. Everyone in here is a cop or a detective who works with me in Harlem.
We just made the film from the particles of life that we had picked up that involved the way Egan and Grasso actually worked.
Billy Friedkin had said to me, you know, after I'd gotten the role, he said, I'd like you to come into New York, you know, a few weeks early and just kind of hang out with the guys a little bit. And so I thought it would be, you know, we'd be in an office someplace and you'd be telling Roy Scheider and I your experiences and what it was like to be a cop. And I had no idea we were going to be in the police car and in some of these areas that didn't look like Hollywood to me, you know.
And I think they attribute a lot of the authenticity to the fact that they saw it all with their own eyes.
And we were just watching. I don't think either one of us got out of the car for the first 4 or 5 days. We were just kind of stunned by the enormity of what was going on in the streets and what you guys were doing.
They came with us for 2 months. They came to the precinct, they came out on arrest, they went to we hit shooting galleries together, and Hackman's attitude was, he was a Midwesterner, he had spent some time in New York, but if he wasn't anti-police, he was close to it. We locked up some guys, grabbed them with junk. Hackman found the junk. Hackman picked up the junk and gave it to us. Okay, get in the car. On the way over, he says, what are you gonna do with this guy? I said, we're gonna lock him up. Yeah, but I found the junk. I says, yeah, so who found it? I saw it, you picked it up. Yeah, but I'm not a cop. I said, will you relax? I says, don't worry about it. I can't. If a guy goes to jail, I said, the guy had junk. He had 30 bags of junk on him. I'm not a cop. I said, relax. But Hackman got an idea then what it's like to deprive somebody of his freedom.
I think like a lot of people that don't have the advantage of really being around police, especially liberals. I consider myself a liberal, and I think that police tend to fall into a category of something less than sensitive, and I think that was probably my attitude prior to doing French Connection, that I was above that. My whole sense of that just totally changed, that I was, and still am, very sympathetic to police all over the United States. Tough job.
Hackman needed a little private tutoring to be able to play the part of Eddie, because Eddie was a type of character that Hackman had never met before.
He didn't have a New York accent, which Egan had the thickest New York accent imaginable. All right, what's going on over there? You know, that's how Egan would sound. All right, Popeye's here.
You dumb guinea. How the hell did I know he had a knife?
How do you put up with this guy? And you said to me, look, if I didn't like Eddie, who would like him? That's the whole basis for my character. That's the whole basis for the relationship. So I wrote in on that one.
But Hackman and Egan were like oil and water. They did not mix in the beginning. Hackman could not stand Egan's supposed hostility towards the people we were putting in jail.
One thing about Sonny I always remember when we were out driving around is that he never stopped at a stop sign. He would just look both ways and go. Never stopped at a sign. Never stopped at a red light. And I thought, well, that's great that a cop can do that. You know, they take that advantage of the law and get away with it. And but he did it in a lovable way.
French Connection began filming on November 30th, 1970, and we had trouble right from the very start.
Billy, remember, Gene wanted to quit the first day. He had difficulty. It was 22 takes on the first day of shooting, trying to slap a dope peddler in the face. Gene is not that way. I was.
I couldn't really bring myself to really lay into this guy. And when it was over that day, I knew it wasn't a successful day of shooting. I said to Billy, Bill, I don't think I can do this.
Billy kept saying, I think we got the wrong guy. And then Gene was whispering to me, I don't think I can handle this part.
So I was supposedly about half convinced of my not being in the picture. You know?
He had to treat people like chattel. And Gene could not really find it within himself to do that convincingly at first. It went against the grain of everything that he felt.
It really is something that it's very tough for me. And I was being this sensitive actor, you know.
I went to Billy. I said, "You want me to stand in for him? I'll slap him all over the place."
Think of the French Connection chase, you got to think of Mr. Phil D'Antoni.
Phil D'Antoni got everybody in the room and he said, "Look, I'm giving you one mandate on this film." He said, "I just finished a film called Bullet that had the greatest chase ever done." And he said, "My mandate to all of you is that I want this chase to be better."
But how could we top this great chase that was done in Bullet? That was the question.
And we kept putting it off and putting it off. We didn't even want to talk about it.
Finally, we were walking up Park Avenue.
And we walked for 55 straight blocks through the streets of New York. And we just let the sound and the feeling of New York pervade our thoughts.
We were recalling that there used to be an elevated train there.
So we started thinking, what could we do that's different from what they did in Bullet, where two cars are chasing each other?
And the idea hit me first, that if we had part of the chase on the L, and
warrant was never honored because Jehan fought in the French resistance beside Charles de Gaulle. And the French government never granted any extradition on Jehan. And that's something that wasn't known by these cops at that time. And that's what intrigued me as well to this case. No matter how successful by increments they were ultimately going to come up against a blank wall.
The French Connection was released on October 9th, 1971.
The style of the French Connection is sort of induced documentary.
The start of new movie making.
One of the great films that combine action and character.
The film gets made. The movie wins 5 Academy Awards.
Well, it's great because my whole career was started by the French Connection.
it was beyond words. I mean, I have difficulty even now explaining it. It's the greatest. It's the greatest thing that could have happened to me career-wise.
The first thing I think about when I think of the French Connection is my check stubs, you know, my royalties.
Billy Friedkin, the director, taking his statuette and putting it in front of me at the governor's ball and saying, "Here, this is yours." Oh, if I could have only kept it.
I didn't think I was going to win, no. I finally did come out after some prodding.
And I was blown away. Here, my first picture that's ever released, and I got an Oscar nomination. Wow. And then, of course, you know, what happens is I was really pissed when I didn't win. Because I thought I should have. And so did my mother.
My betting on the subject and on Friedkin had been correct.
And sitting there in the audience and watching 5 people who I'd been working with come up and get their awards was very exciting.
We set the marker that the rest have to come up to. And you know, if you look at the French Connection, it still holds up. It still works.
I had done other things as an actor prior to the French Connection, but I think I got grounded. I really felt that I knew more about my craft after that, the kind of commitment it took to make that character work. I really like Phil D'Antoni. If all the producers, you know, could be like him, I would work to 90 years old. Of course, that's not always the case.
Last days on the job, Eddie and I, Mr. Narcotics is what they called him. He led the squad in collars every year. Situation develops. They come up with a new routine. They're going to send all the experienced detectives out to the outlying precincts. And nobody's ever going to touch Egan. They might send everybody else, but not going to touch Mr. Narcotics. This guy, the guy who was Narcotics, is leaving. And we went downstairs, and he started to get into his car, and he turned around, he looked at me, and I said to him, "Listen, like, what are we going to do tomorrow?" And you said,
"We're not going to do anything tomorrow." And I walked away and got in my car, drove around the block, and I noticed you on the park bench bawling like a baby. And I made a U-turn and come back and said, "I'll still see you around."
I want to thank Phil D'Antoni, Billy Friedkin, Dick Zanuck, David Brown, 20th Century Fox, and especially my partner, Eddie Egan, for making all of this possible. I'm just happy I was able to complete this ride before I, too, go to that big precinct in the sky. Remember this, Ed?